to the 5th episode of the Sacred Gut Punch podcast. I'm Dr. Tomi White-Bryan. I'm a coach and consultant in human and organizational performance and the creator of Emotional Intelligence 3.0, a system for achieving extraordinary performance. Today, I'm so excited to have Joe Mittiga, fresh off his South African TEDx talk. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Well, so Joe, I like to jump right in. Can you tell us about your sacred gut punch?
Oh gosh, which one, quite honestly? I just had one recently. I've been on a conscious path, Tomi, for 30 years. And my original story happened back in 1994. It was, interestingly enough, February 20th, 1994, a friend of mine comes in hollering and screaming. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? And he says, Joe, you're never going to guess what these crazy people want me to do. And, we were big time cussers and everything back then. I was in my early 30s.
Well, so Joe, welcome. Some of us never outgrow that part of our youth.
well, we're recording here, right? So
right, we are.
I'm going to keep it kid friendly.
Okay.
But I was like, what? He says they want me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and you're never going to and not drink. It's like, not drink. Like, who would ever think about that? And literally, my first one ever, 2 I fought across the forehead. I never ever had I ever even thought about not drinking. And I wasn't one of these sloppy, I wasn't that. I was in my early 30s, but literally when I asked myself the question, when had I gone 30 or 60 days? I had to backtrack all the way to about 14, 15 years old. And that was my original, wow, never thought about it. Oh, better do something about it experience.
Joe, that's a compelling question, isn't it?
Yeah. To
stop doing something for 30, 60, 90 days. And what impact did that have on you?
It was really powerful because I thought at the time, oh, no big deal. Hey, I can do that simple, right? Not. 7 days later, I'm at a friend's house. Addiction, for people that know about addiction, they know what I'm talking about. For people that don't, you probably don't. But it's literally like I felt like addiction had me by the throat. Every part of my body was craving. When I say drugs, I was a marijuana smoker. They didn't have the drugs that they do today.
Right.
But so I'm sitting at a buddy's house. I'm literally like white knuckling because every part of me is like crying for it. And after 30 minutes, and I wasn't a God guy. I was one of these raised in a church that I just couldn't connect with. And I put a pact with God when I was mid-20s saying, listen, you leave me alone. In other words, don't strike me dead with lightning. Just don't kill me for lightning. And if I go to jail, I won't ask for help. Right. So I was good. But that day, the 20th of February back then, I stood up and I said, God, if I'm not supposed to drink a drug, I need your help. Rush of energy comes through my body. Tear comes out of my eyes. All compulsion's gone. And that's what really started my journey on more of a self-discovery path. 54 days later, I had memories of some pretty severe abuse that were one day not there, the memories, the next day there, like we're talking right here, and the following 7 years.
Yeah. So Joe, I'm curious, do you believe that the addiction was to help you cover up those memories?
Without question. It was one of those things to where we do what we have to survive. If I would have been in an environment all those years ago, and this is, discovery isn't about blaming our yesterday, right? Everybody did the best they could. But, the truth of the matter is 50 years ago, 60 years, I'm 60. Nobody knew about self-discovering and honoring your feelings and embracing. Nobody knew about it. And this particular event that happened, it was a couple of 16-year-old boys, and, they just did some nasty things, and they thought it was funny. And, if I'd have been older, I probably would have thought it was funny, but the effect was pretty dramatic. So, you live your life with kind of a secret and all that type of stuff. And there's no question that it's kind of like where it passed over for me. It was normal. Everybody kind of did it in high school. In college, everybody kind of drank and whatever. But for me, it never stopped. The pattern, my high school day pattern of drinking all the time, it never stopped. So it kind of went from more of a normal kind of limiting belief shame to the more you do crazy, the more the voices just get bigger, more into a toxic shame. And that's when I didn't know I couldn't stop until this experience happened.
Right. And you've written, is it one or two books about this? Is it two books?
It's actually several. The
Several.
main
Okay.
book, yeah, the main book I have behind me here, Healing Addiction. Originally, I called it Your Inner Child Has Rights Too.
Mm.
But when Tom Freeland published it for me, it's called Healing Addiction. That's basically what happened for me. I had memories of myself. I'm 32 years old at the time, 31 years old at the time, but I have memories of myself as a 6-year-old little boy, right? So that whole concept of embracing that little kid in me, I didn't know anything about it at the time. But when I learned that we are as equally developed as an emotional being as a mental being, and most of us aren't emotionally developed because society didn't know how to do it, I realized, oh goodness, I had to learn how to embrace that part. I say now when I'm out talking, my whole idea is give a voice to your darkest parts. And in my world, I call that the inner child. You call it whatever you want. It's just that part in you that's not okay. And that's where I started that whole journey. I was with a woman that could help me do it. And I took a 7-year period that I lived on less than $3,000 a year for multiple years.
Now, Joe, you've told me a little bit about that 7-year period. In my model of emotional well-being, we have this thing called the emotional well.
Yeah.
It's metaphorical. It sits sort of from below the throat down to the gut, and it's filled with those inner child experiences that. And Joe, like you, my family, even though they're a bunch of psychologists, weren't able to teach me how to emotionally grow up and manage myself, right? And I talk about as adults, we have to clear out that well. When you first told me that story of the 7 years, I was so profoundly impacted by how you cleared your well during that time. Do you mind sharing that with our listeners?
Absolutely. And I have to caveat by saying my story wasn't normal. You know what I mean? It started 15, 18 years before. I learned a couple things in college. I learned how to play chess, and I learned that myself and a boss would never get along, right? But I started the entrepreneurial journey young. I worked 7 days a week. So I was not only moving into a new path of discovery, I was always also burned out with life as a concept. So, and I have this massive protector part. I'm raised in an Italian culture where you just protect your family. And I just had this massive protector part that came up in me that said, I'm going to do it, because I couldn't get this 6-year-old little boy out of my head. Now, at the time, I had been doing inner child therapy from my mid 20s. I was 26 years old the first time I'm sitting at my mom's house and water's coming out of my eyes. So disconnected from what that was. Someone had to teach me it was tears. It was crying.
Right.
And, I definitely grew up in the world of big boys don't cry. That was definitely me. So that 7-year period, it was more, I wasn't doing it for the adult Joe. I was doing it for that little boy in me. And I didn't know how else to do it except close down my world and just get in a safe place. And honestly, I moved 50 miles away. I lived in an unfinished apartment in an old warehouse, like literally concrete floors, had a bathroom. So it was decent.
Right.
And the first emotion was rage. And I mean, bunches of it. And it was fine because I could scream as much as I want. I was in a business district. No one could hear me. And then one day, the next layer, you know what that was? It wasn't rage anymore. It was grief. And I'll never forget. I called my therapist, Nancy. I was like, I don't know what's going on, man. I think I'm crazy. I can't stop crying. I said, I think I've lost my mind. And I'll never forget. She says, Joe, you have lost your mind, but you found your heart.
Oh, what a beautiful thing and isn't that the truth when we can finally get past the anger that's that protective barrier?
Yes.
And anger and its siblings, rage, fury, right? Whatever that is.
Yes.
there's this beautiful, profound grief waiting for us.
That is exactly correct. To be honest, because I got my rage out in a sacred place, there wasn't anything after it, right? Typically, what people do when they take their rage out, they take it out on somebody else. And then the immediate reaction of the rage is guilt, shame, or angst. So you're not really healing anything. You're not going anywhere. You're spinning. You're angry. You take it out on somebody, then you feel guilty, which then you feel bad about yourself. Well, I'm in a sacred spot. It's me with me, right? So I could literally just get the energy. I started to identify emotion as energy, not good, bad, or indifferent. It was just energy needed to come out, and it was just all suppressed. So by the time I would get this rage out and I let myself say whatever I needed to about anybody I needed, because it was just me. And then out of nowhere, I had this belief that's like, you know what? I am a peon here. The universal force is going to swallow up my energy easy, right? And
Yeah.
that was really a concern for me. And sure enough, I got that rage out, and then grief came. And then, it's a layered thing. But yeah, Nancy Carter, God bless her. She passed probably 6, 7 years ago. She
Wow.
really saved my life. She taught me, she brought me into my body, a massage therapist who was also many years in a program. And she brought me into my body through massage and therapy and talking. And when I said that to her, that was just profound. Went from my head to my heart.
Yeah. Well, so Joe, a couple of things. First of all, what a gift that you understood you needed support. A lot
Mhm.
of us try to make the journey alone.
Yeah.
And I talk about grief is better shared in community,
Yes.
right? When we have someone to, like you saying, am I losing my mind? Sometimes we just need a touch point in the world. And so I come from a family, Joe, where, my mother, I think her favorite line, love her dearly. Like you said, our parents did the best that they could. If you started crying, her favorite line was, well, I'll give you something to cry about, right?
Sure.
And so we, like you and our family, we just totally shut all of that down. And I love your description of it as this energy had to come out
Right.
because what my research shows, what my experience with coaching clients shows is that energy gets trapped in the emotional well. And that's what you were letting it out in a safe, sacred space.
Yes.
I have a journal that I have told my husband, if I go before you, burn that. Don't let anybody ever read it. Because that was me working it out. And I wasn't nice to anybody when I was working it out. Right. And so
Yes.
I love that you had a space to do that.
Yes, and quite honestly, you're not because it's not about anybody else. It's your stuff. It's your sacred stuff, and you're keeping it in this particular example, in your sacred space. You're not hurting anybody with it. It's yours, and that's what I learned. I learned the difference. I also learned the difference that support rarely is a family member. Rarely,
Mm,
support is typically needs to be somebody that is on the same type of journey as you, and then, you get your support from people on the journey. And then I always say, you get your support from those people, then you take the goodie back to your husband. You take the goodie back to your wife. I've got
yeah.
several people around the country I support. One woman just recently, we connected through LinkedIn. She's having these massive God moments, right? Which is just, she thinks she's nuts. She's literally hearing God. And we're talking back and forth, kind of mirroring for her. Then come to find out her husband is in literally 2 weeks into treatment, right? So really
Wow.
through her, get connected with her husband and help him, support that process. He's 60, 90 days now. And she said to me more than once, she says, Joe, this feels like such a one-sided relationship. And I said, my friend, it is. I'm not your friend. I'm not supposed to be your friend. I'm here to support you until we can find you somebody local, right? I'm here to support you. And then you take the goodie back to your husband. And I got my world over here. And that's a big challenge I think that some people make is not everybody's on this journey. Not everybody understands this path. And it's not about everybody understanding the path. So sometimes if you're in a painful place and you go to try to get compassion from somebody and they don't know what the heck you're doing, They don't give you compassion. They give you criticism because they don't know. And the truth of the matter is, and this is really a true statement, I've got a workshop that I've put together for women's conferences. It's called Passion of the Child. And so very often, the difference between the way a woman processes things and a man processes things, a woman, when she's seeking support, seeks empathy and compassion. When a man's seeking support, he's seeking more, a woman seeking love and compassion, a man seeking more empathy. Empathy meaning, been there, done that. If I can make it, you can make it. Boom. A woman is seeking more, gosh, I'm sorry. What can I do? I'm here to help. They're different things. And I can't tell you the number of times where I've witnessed people where they're in a place, they're hurting, they're trying to be, and since they're hurting, they're vulnerable. And then they go to somebody who loves them, but their natural reactionary pattern is like gasoline because they don't know. They just don't know.
I belong to a group of leadership consultants that meet and, coaches, that kind of profession. And one of the things, and we've been together for 14 years now, one of the things that they taught me is the most important thing we can do is be with, right? I don't have to fix it. I don't have to solve it. If I can just sit with you and be with you as you walk through this, that might be the most powerful thing that happens for you.
No question.
Right? And it's not, and so we talk about holding space. Sometimes it's not mine to solve. I can't do anything about it.
No.
So I have two sons. I used to say to them when they would come home from school and tell me something, I'm like, am I just listening here or am I actually trying to help? Right? Because they would get frustrated that mom would try to help and all they wanted was somebody to listen.
That's right.
And so, right. So yeah, that feels really important, but I love this workshop that you have for women. What I'm wondering about is, Joe, how do you stand in the uncertainty? How do you practice standing in the not knowing? Or the discomfort. I think that's one of the hardest things for us as humans to do is to sit in the discomfort of waiting for what's next or whatever the discomfort is.
Well, what happened for me, Tommy, is quite honestly, I said years ago I wasn't a God guy. Well, what happened was the deeper I created a connection with my inner child, and what I learned was the listening component, right, is the true healing. Because we can't fix, but we can create trust. And if we're listening and that person is feeling heard, or our inner child is feeling heard, right? Then when the child feels heard, the child starts trusting us more, that deeper parts of self. Well, the more that happened for me, the more my availability to trust that there was a power greater than me had me in his hands, which way back when I couldn't say the word God. It raised the hair on the back of my neck. So I would use spirit or great spirit as my synonym to God, our higher power, So what I learned over time is that my next book that's coming out in September is called We, W-E. It's we, and then the tagline underneath is ask, listen, live.
Wow.
We're asking for strength and courage from a higher power. We're listening to the deepest and darkest parts of our little kid. And as we move through those two behaviors, then we go live life. So for Joe, when I realized, just like I would my boys, I've got two boys. And as their dad, I only want good things for them, right? I only want good things. That doesn't mean they're not going to go through their challenges, their highs, their lows, of course, but I'm going to support them. So the way I learned how to deal with the uncertainty, the difference between something being in faith versus something being in fact, when we don't know what's going on, it's faith. When we do know what's going on, it's moved to fact. As I created a relationship with a power greater than myself, which today I call God, but more I call it divinity, because I'm out there in the world a lot where if you put too many adjectives on that are more in the religious world, then we start talking about religion versus spirituality. So every day I pray for strength and courage first, And I'm praying for strength and courage from a power greater than myself. And if I'm in hurting and in pain, I'm praying for that strength to be able to feel what I need to heal. Because if I don't feel it, it eventually just acts out in my world somewhere. I mean, it just does. And what I really saw out in the world so very often, and I still see it, people have mental answers for emotional issues. You say, I feel this, I feel that, I feel this. And then they go, well, you need to think this way, think this way. And I used to say to myself, well, no kidding. If I could think that way, I wouldn't be doing this, right? So one of the exercises I do with people is I do a first step. I call it a first step. And in the program, you write down all those limiting beliefs. You just write them down. And in a workshop, in more of a 3-hour a day long workshop, I have people write out the voices. And what are those voices? Your limiting beliefs. And I'll never forget as long as I live. My mentor Nancy taught me this. She says, Joe, you need to write out your voices. I was like, okay. And then the very first thing I said, I said, what am I going to write? She says, I don't know. And my very first voice was, I don't have any voices, right? Literally. And then bullet point. And it's just like, when you get it out on paper, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart. And you just listen, and it's not therapy of dialogue. It's bullet point. I had 12 pages of it. I mean,
Wow.
You name it, it was there. And what I learned over time was where those limiting beliefs came from was because of a hurt little kid. Think about it. I'm not good enough. Well, where was I'm not good enough? Well, because as a little kid, when I needed emotional support and love and whatever, I didn't get it. So that little kid, you didn't get what he needs. So a little kid can't say, well, mom's unconscious. She don't know what she's doing. We're 6, right? So the little kid just says, well, I'm not good enough. They develop that. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable enough. I'm not because the parents couldn't. And again, it's not a blame or shame. It's just what it was. So now I have these limiting voices, right? We write them down. I was taught that anything you get out of yourself, it cuts it in half. Those voices that are in there, they double and triple. And then the next thing I do is we talk about the critical voices. I don't know if you're a sports fan, but every time somebody is playing a professional sport and they miss the ball, like I could even catch the ball. And when they miss the ball, you should hear the voices in my head, the critical voices and the voices that you're talking about somebody else. And then the true healing part, or the key part, which is the hardest part, is then you got to tell somebody. And that person you tell needs to be a professional, needs to be somebody who's done it before, needs to be somebody who's doing it with you. It needs to be in a sacred space. And that's when multidimensionalism starts happening. You've got the part doing the telling, and you've got the part that's being told about. There's 2 of you now, okay? And in the past, the part that's being told about, the one with all the critical voices, is typically the one driving the car. It's the one in control of your life. And you wonder why your life isn't where you want it to be. Well, because this voice is trying to guide your life being based on, I'm not good enough, I'm not this, I'm not that, right? And so I learned that whole process. And over time, I did it enough to where the part sharing, I would share it with my counselor, Nancy. The part doing the sharing, that's more of a higher power voice. And what's the difference? When you hear a voice that's an absolute yes or no, black or white, good or bad, that's more a critical parent voice. When you hear a voice that in your own head that says, well, we'll see. There's a possibility. Maybe we can, maybe we won't. Should be okay. A more all-inclusive voice, that was the guidance of a higher power. Over time, I just learned how to be guided the different ways.
You're bringing up for me, Joe, something Ron Rivera, back when he was coach of the Carolina Panthers, and they went to the Super Bowl. And he was talking about, he had all these friends calling him up, telling him what he needed to do to win the Super Bowl. And he said, listen, if you've never been there, don't draw me a map.
Yeah.
And Joe, that's what I heard, right? This is the profound power that I've realized from building my own model of emotional well-being is we need these role models. We need people who've been there and show us how to do it. And when you said, right? We think, but we don't, the heart's usually not involved, right? When that heart slams shut as that 6-year-old little boy, or for me, probably the 4-year-old little girl, the mind takes over and all it knows how to do is control.
That's
It
right.
doesn't know how to process the feelings. It doesn't know how to feel whatever's happening. And so we don't, Joe, have a lot of role models who teach us to stand in the feelings, do we?
No, exactly. And when we really understand that we're not a single essence, we're a multi-dimensional being. Everybody, you as a female human shape, me as a man, we both have a male and female side, right? Our male side, by definition, is the mental and the physical components of us. Our female side is the emotional and spiritual part of ourselves. That's why women on this path have more of a keen nature to get it quicker, because your ability to birth a child, you're designed to birth a child, right? A literal baby. So your communion with that emotional and spiritual side of yourself, because of that capacity, is at least innately in you. Most men, they don't even know that exists. And I'm not kidding. And I know that because prior to a moment in time, I didn't know it exists. I'll never forget when that whole part of me started opening up. It was a bizarre experience. It really, really was.
Mm.
And society as a whole, forever until recently, guides us through how we think, goal setting, controlling your thoughts, making sure you're doing it all in our head, whether our issues are in our heart. And if you look at that male-female side, right, when I say spiritual and emotional, they're kind of connected together. So if you're trying to have a spiritual experience, that's a real life thing, not a thought, you have to go through it through your emotional sense of self, through that female sense of self. And a fully functioning person is going to have those things balanced. For example, somebody who's emotionally connected, spiritually drawn, and then builds a business plan around their emotions and their passion, and then takes action because they're physically fit, right? It's a full loop of a fully functioning person. More than once, I've had people that I've worked with that are so far out into the emotional, spiritual part, they couldn't create a business plan if their life depended upon it. Then they wonder why they can't make money. And then you have the other side over here who's totally in the mental side. And you try to ask them, well, what do you love to do? And they'll say, well, and they give a mental answer to an emotional question.
Well, Joe, that's the duality, isn't it? That's how wholeness happens. You bring the thinking mind and the feeling mind, or the heart, together, and
Yes,
that's where we become whole.
that's exactly correct. And the way I did that was through the embracing of my inner child, through the embracing, because for Joe, the emotional side of me, I reached that through the vision of a little kid. And this is why I did it. 30 some odd years ago, the way I thought about myself, there's no way I could be nice to me. I didn't even like me, right? But when I envisioned myself as a 6-year-old little kid, who the heck doesn't like a 6-year-old little kid? Even I like a 6-year-old little kid, right?
Yeah.
So I could literally, it's still me being nice to me, right? But it's me being nice to me as a vision of a 6-year-old. And through that process, those deeper parts of me, those started to feel what they needed to feel. And that's not easy. I mean, I'll tell everybody right now, this is not easy. None of this is easy. But I also say, if what you've been doing is working, then you're not on shows like this. You're not. But there's a whole world of people. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it a lot now. I'm out there a lot now. The world is like waking up in a different way than it ever has. And there's been concepts that have worked for the past 25 years that people have been doing for 20 years, but now they're looking for more. And like you're talking about with the emotional well and all that, shows like this, it's going to just continue to attract people who are searching for that next style, that next thing.
Yeah.
The inner child, when we think about the inner child, there's 4 basic emotions: mad, glad, sad, and scared, right? Well, God doesn't make any mistakes. Each one of those emotions have a real life thing. The challenge is most people that aren't connected to their emotions, they take their anger and their fear out on somebody else. So it's the behavior that is labeled. People label the emotion as less than perfect, but in reality, it's the behavior.
Yeah, Joe, I want to harp on that point. Anger is not good or bad.
Right.
It's what we do with our anger
Exactly.
or our fury or our fear.
Yep.
Right?
That's
That makes
exactly
it good or bad. Well, is there Joe, as you unified yourself and on this wholeness journey, was there a poem, a prayer, a mantra, song, or story that made a difference for you something that you regularly share with other people?
In my book, I wrote 7, 8, 9 different poems. How the whole book process started, right? I'm
Wow.
literally living in a room after I'm out of the warehouse. I'm living in a room, $220 a month. I lived on $300 a month. For $220 was my dwelling, bed, bath, and I lived on $80 for food. Back then, there weren't cell phones. Computers didn't really even exist. All that, it didn't exist. I sat in silence. So one day I hear this voice that says, "You're going to write." I'm like, "I'm not writing." "You're going to write." "I'm not writing." And then the voice says, "You're going to write or you're not going to sleep." And then, of course, all my expletives, I start cussing, in other words. I said, "Okay, fine, I'll write." And the poem Soulmates came through me, which is in my book. And then didn't think much of it. Next day, about 2 days later, the same thing. And then basically the same voice says, "Now it's time to write." And I write on big pads of paper like this. So
Big yellow pads, right? Yellow
yellow
pads.
pads from corner to corner. 275 pages. My book is 105,300 words or something like that. It basically was literally dictated through me. It just channeled through me. That's just how it worked. And so through that whole time, I didn't really know what was going on. I mean, I was learning and growing and kind of figuring it out. A second book came through me back then, and back then my first book was Inner Child Has Rights Too, which I still have. I still keep that cover and everything. The second book was called 21st Century Sales from the Soul, which is now I've shifted it around, called Awaken Greatness, which is another keynote that I do. The Awaken Greatness will come out next spring. But how I connected to my emotions was music, any music. I would literally, because I didn't know how to do it. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say I didn't know how. So what would happen was I started feeling this, whatever. I would sit in front of, when it was time for me to grieve, I would sit in front of back then, like a cassette tape,
Mm-hmm.
and I would play the same song over and over and over. I wouldn't go into music. I would just let that song, the same song, over and over. And it could be 5 minutes, it could be 2 hours. The music kept me in my heart, and whatever I needed to grieve would just come out, and I would just play it over and over and over. So for me to emote, it was music, not any particular. At different times, there were different songs. Steve Perry had a song, "Stand Alone." My mantra is Luther Vandross's song, "To Dream Impossible Dreams." I still sing that song. Whitney Houston's song came out brand new, "Greatest Love of All." Those are songs that back then were brand new for me, but it's anybody. You're going to have your style, your thing, that thing that connects to you. But what most people don't understand is they say, "Oh, I'm crying, so I need to stop. I'm doing something wrong." It's the other one. If you're crying, stop the car, pull over, give yourself that 5 minutes, right? And just let it come out. People wonder why I say it all the time. When people are quote unquote depressed, they're depressed. The darkness they're feeling, depression, because I've been there. Depression is when everything is just so dark and heavy. It's like a wet blanket over you. I'm not trying to be a doctor here. I know there are some times where there's chemical imbalances, but
Right.
for the rest of us, it's just because there's so much emotion in there that it's just filled up to here, and it just needs to come out. It's more suppression than depression.
Yeah. So, Joe, you're bringing up for me. I can't remember the name of the TV show, But Harrison Ford is a counselor in it. And he says, he's like, you need to grieve for 15 minutes every day. Just play really sad songs.
Yes.
And, every night I have a practice of grieving for what I lost that day.
Yes.
It could be something as simple as, I threw out a pair of tennis shoes that I absolutely adored. And because I don't want to take any of that grief into tomorrow with me.
Yes.
Well, Joe, you've been an awesome guest. Where can people find your books? Barnes and Noble, Amazon?
Yes. The book Healing Addiction, it's on every,
Platform?
every platform out there. Anybody that needs a free copy, just go to my website, spiritwalkers.com or innerchild.info. Innerchild.info. Somebody wants to just download it right onto their computer, they can go to innerchild.info right now and just download the PDF. And it's my story. Basically, what the book is, it talks about everything we're talking about here. It talks about the whole process, where I started, how I made it through, what I did. And now, literally 28 years ago, when I wrote the book, I was writing all this cool glory, that like the last chapter is 12 spiritual laws of abundance. The third section is it's the AA program, the 12 steps of the AA integrated with inner child work. So that's what it is right there. And each step of the AA program has a principle: honesty, integrity, blah, blah, blah. So I created 12 steps of spiritual abundance. And it's weird to read it because I wrote it 25 years ago. And literally 25 years ago, I was describing the life I live now. And that's true.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my life is pretty amazing. Great kids, great business. I do all of this truly because of the glory. And, it is so worth it. And it's not easy, not for the weak of heart. But if you're I always say this, and I'm not kidding. If you're guided to a show like Tommy's show here, I'm talking to the people watching. If you're guided to the show, you're special. You're unique. You are. A lot of people won't be, but 1 billion people will be. Not all 9 billion of us are going to get it, but the billion of us that get it, they need shows just like this. So for the people listening here now, if you're guided to the show, know you're unique. Know that there's something other than yourself guiding you here, because today you're going to hear my message, right? Next week, you're going to hear somebody else's message. It's going to be the same concept, just from a different perspective. And, what I learned over time is that it's not for the weak-hearted, though if you're guided here, whether you know it or not, you're not weak-hearted. You're a true spiritual warrior. You just are, whether you know it or not. And that's why I love doing these programs like this.
Well, Joe, you've been a wonderful guest. Real quickly, can you repeat the sites for the listeners so that they will know where to find you?
Yeah, the main one is just www.innerchild.info.
Okay.
INFO, innerchild.info. And it'll take them basically to a page, says a little bit about me, a little bit about the book, and right in the center, click PDF free download. They can have it in the next 2 minutes.
Joe, thanks for making that gift available to our listeners and to all in the world who are looking to you as a role model for doing this inner child work. Thank you. It's been a beautiful gift to me and now to our listeners to share in your experiences today. Thank you for opening your heart and wisdom to us. I really appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you. It's been an honor. I appreciate your time.
All right. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Sacred Gut Punch podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsors who make the podcast possible, the EI 3.0 companies of Brian Insights and the Center for Emotional Wellbeing. And of course, to my husband, I'm so lucky he's in my life, Attorney Jim Bryan. Thank you for your endless support. I love you to the moon and back, Jimmy. If you're finding inspiration in the stories, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends and family who can benefit from these stories of resilience and rising. Remember, if you are hurting or need help, please find the right support for you. There's someone out there who can help you. You're not alone, even if you feel like you are. Call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org. And if you're not in the United States, Befrienders worldwide at befrienders.org can help you. Until next time, dear ones, may you use the difficulty as you rise with grace.